Welcome to the Stoa. The Stoa is a digital campfire where we cohere and dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of what's happening now. Boom, boom, boom. All right, check-ins. I am feeling stoic in a playful way. And there's like a sensual element too, in a meta way. So, welcome to the Stoa. The Stoa is a place that's stewarded by a Stoic, and I'm viewing it as a digital campfire for us to cohere and dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of this moment. And today we have Rhys Lindmark, and I'm going to read about me on Rhys's website. Hi, my name is Rhys Lindmark. I'm a post-VC who helps frontier people manifest their ideas around post-capitalism, meta-rationality, and social technical systems. So basically, my best friend. So today, what we're going to do is Rhys is going to share his thoughts on the title of today's talk, COVID to Post-Capitalism, and he's going to run us through a series of exercises. And I'll let him explain it and do everything here. So with that being said, I'll head over to Rhys.
Sweet. Thank you, Peter. Can everybody hear me okay? Give me a thumbs up. Okay, sweet. Thumbs up. Yeah, nice. Hello, everybody. How's it going? Woohoo! We'll do some check-ins, some individual check-ins in a second, but thank you all for coming. Today I'm drinking out of a very large mug. This mug is almost as big as my face, so that's impressive. And again, thank you to Peter for hosting this space. I think it's really cool. And it's a cool space for experimentation. So that's what we're going to do today, is do some experimentation. And so at a high level, what's going to happen is, let me actually start to share my screen here. So desktop one, beautiful. Thumbs up, can you see my screen? We got some thumbs. Okay, sweet. And so hopefully you're in the right place. We're talking about post-capitalism today and how our humanity's response to COVID kind of embodies it. And as a note for everybody, this will be about a little bit over an hour for folks. So hopefully you're able to stay the whole time. And if not, that's okay too. As Peter noted, my name is Rhys. I used to work at MIT teaching blockchain ethics stuff. And I have a cool podcast. I'm working on this thing called Bentoism, which we'll chat about later today. And I self-tax 10% of my income, which is a fun thing, which we'll also talk about later today. And today's, the overview of today is, we're going to talk a little bit about paradigms and how to make change within a system. And then we're going to talk about the specific, these next four: networkism, coherent pluralism, bentoism, and generosity, is this these four pieces that kind of combined make up this new mindset, or this new paradigm that I think we're going towards in the future. And so that's kind of the high level overview. And as Peter mentioned as well, we're going to do a lot of, each of these will have like a little breakout room where we will be able to chat with each other about stuff. So that will be fun. Before we do anything, what I want to do first is do some check-ins with each other. There are a lot of people on this call from all over the place. And so I think it'll be fun to just check in with each other. So I'm going to make some breakout rooms. They're going to be, and we're going to take 2 minutes in those rooms. And what you just want to do is you just want to say, hey, how, who are you? How are you doing? How are you really doing? And then also, if you can say, what made you curious about this session? And on that note, I actually want to, so we're going to have, there's this beautiful document, which is going to be our note-taking document for today. Because there's all these breakout rooms, but you all have lots of good ideas, we want to share and capture those ideas in this Google Doc. So I'm going to share this in the Zoom now. Let me go to more and then click chat and then click share. Beautiful. So everybody should click on that link. And give me a thumbs up once you've clicked on that link and are in there. Sweet. So hopefully there's once I see about 7 people in there. I see +3, +4, +8. Great. So click on that link, get in there. And so What we're going to do in these breakout rooms is you're just going to say hi to each other, essentially, and then also answer what made you curious. And the idea is that as you are saying what made you curious, and as you're sharing that with each other, kind of be typing those into the doc and say, this is what made me curious, so that both you're sharing it with your partner and that I kind of know why you're here for future reference. And then one other note before I break everybody out into these breakout rooms is that stay in the session until the timer ends. So the way that these Zoom, everybody's been Zooming a ton recently, and the way that they work is I'm going to click end breakout room, and it's going to say you have 60 seconds. You can click, if you want to, you can click the return to session button. Do not do that. Wait the full 60 seconds. Let it automatically bring you back in. That will give you the full 2 minutes with the person. Does that make sense? So it's going to say 60 seconds. Don't click on it. Wait. Okay, so with that, just say hi to each other. We're going to go into these breakout rooms for 120 seconds, 2 minutes, and let me make the rooms now. Click this button. Click this button. Okay, welcome back, everybody. I kind of love this because everybody comes back and you can see everybody's kind of smiling and like everybody just had like kind of a fun conversation, and you can see all the 18 faces being like, oh, cool. There's some random other people from the internet here right now. That's cool. So thank you for doing that. I don't know if anybody took notes, but that's okay. For the future, yeah, people who are typing, that's awesome. For the future, I definitely think that having the notes will be helpful for me and for you. So let's talk about section 1 right now, this theory of paradigms. So the idea here, and I would call this actually the theory of change. So again, let me share my screen. And sweet, you present. Beautiful. So the macro idea here is the work that I mostly do is around paradigm change. And the idea here is that if you have a lot of problems in the world, like climate change or inequality, or right now we have, COVID-19, there's a lot of different solutions that you can propose. You could try to change norms, like for climate change around plane flights. If you're trying to, fight inequality, you can change the marginal tax rate. Or for COVID-19, you can like fund vaccine development. So there are a lot of different options here. And the way that I think about those, at the highest leverage option is what's called like paradigm change or like mindset change. And this is from this great woman, Donella Meadows, in her book, 12 Leverage Points, or in her blog post on 12 Leverage Points, where she talks about how if you want to change that little, circle at the bottom left corner here, you can either do it by changing the parameters, which would be like changing, the tax rate from 27% to 28% or whatever. Or you could change the goals. So you could just actually say, let's actually change the goals of the system. Or you can change this more abstract thing called the paradigm. And that, though, has the highest amount of leverage. So as an example of this, with something like Facebook, if you are in Facebook and you think that there's too much addiction on Facebook these days, you can either change, some of a very small specific thing, like maybe in the UX, you say, hey, do you want to keep scrolling? No, I don't really want to keep scrolling right now. That's like a very small kind of parameter-based change. Or you could change the goals of the system. So traditionally, Facebook's main goal was engagement, which is like time on site. But then they changed it to be, let's change the goal to be time well spent. And when they changed it to be time well spent, that then changed the goals of the designers and everybody in Facebook to be like, maybe we don't want people to just be scrolling endlessly or whatever. Or you could go up even one level further and go to something like social media as a utility and say, hey, this is thinking of it as it's kind of a more of a macro paradigmatic mindset change around what is Facebook? Should Facebook be is it just like a company that is driven to connect people, or should we see it as, a public utility? So that's an example of what I mean by paradigm change. And I want to compare it to this thing by Lawrence Leslie called his pathetic dot. And this has these four little things here that are pointing at this human, the pathetic dot in the middle, and they're the kinds of incentives and kind of hidden defaults that can affect that person. So with markets, you can affect somebody, you can incentivize things, you can make laws, you could change some norms, you could like shame people for doing stuff or whatever, for not wearing the masks or whatever, or you can make some code. And those are all different ways to kind of incentivize someone to do stuff, to like change behavior in the world. And so I like to think about this, but where do paradigms fit within this? They exist, again, one level above this. So the paradigm is these underlying mindsets that then get manifest in the laws, in the markets, in the norms, or in the code. Okay, so it's not the code itself, it's not the norms itself, it's like one level abstracted. Another way to think about this is with institutions. So you have religions or nation states or companies. And again, those things are manifestations. They manifest the paradigm, but they are not the paradigm in and of itself. So when I talk about post-capitalism, it's kind of no one really knows what post-capitalism means. Everybody knows that late-stage capitalism is here and is with us, but no one really knows what's next. And so when I think about post-capitalism, I think that some folks will talk about it as an economic system, but I disagree with that. I think that post-capitalism, I think the best way to frame it is as a mindset, and then that mindset will be manifest in in its economic systems and institutions and other things, but really thinking of it as a mindset is the best way to propose this. So when we look later on the line, the rest of today's talk about how post-capitalism as a mindset is manifest, it's not a specific economic system, it's a paradigmatic or a paradigm that is then being manifested in a bunch of sub things within society. So with that, let's try some breakout rooms again. So we're going to go into the rooms, and this time, instead of 2 minutes, you're going to have 3 minutes. And first, you're going to just chat with the other person about, like, check for understanding or critiques. You're going to be like, hey, here's what I understood. Is this what you understood? Is this what Rhys was saying? Maybe you'll like say, I didn't really get you here. You can like type that into the Google Doc. Or you can critique and be like, I disagree with you. I think that this is a bad way to view this or whatever. And if you want to, here's this bonus question, which is to give a historical example of how paradigm or mindset change trickled down into the system. So again, we're going to break out into 2 rooms with everybody. And let's do the same rooms for the first half, and then we're going to switch rooms for the, we're going to recreate the rooms every time. That'll be more fun. So let's do that with this. And again, on the on here, you can see that there's paradigms is the next big section here. So as you start to type stuff, maybe choose to have one of you as like the note taker and to put those notes in here and be typing. So with that, let's take 3 minutes in these rooms. Ready, set, go into your rooms. See you in 3 minutes.
Hey man, so I just saw your email. You lost host status?
It was hilarious actually. I'll show you the image later, but yeah, I lost host status.
So you can bring people back. I'll give it to you now.
So I couldn't bring people. So were you able to bring people back, by the way?
I didn't do it yet. I just wanted to talk to you first to see what your plan was.
That would be great. I think you should oh sweet. Now I'm going to say close all rooms. Beautiful. Okay. Is it possible to close all rooms? Click quicker. Whatever. That works. Folks who were, so I guess the side note here, Peter, just for future reference, is that I tried to join a room to just see what was happening and to be part of the conversation. And then when I tried to do that, it said, you're no longer a host anymore. It then brought me back to the main room alone. And I was just waiting.
Yeah, makes sense. Cool.
So that's good learning for future times.
For all of us, yeah.
But that's actually sad because it's fun to be able to join the breakout rooms.
Just pop in and out.
I wonder if I messed up. Well, we'll try that out at a different time.
Maybe you have to be the owner of the channel or something like that in order to do that.
Yeah, exactly. So welcome back, everybody. Everybody else will be here in about 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So we'll go there in a second. Okay. Hello, everybody, and welcome back. If you all may not have known this, but that was longer than 3 minutes, and it was also a sad user experience for me. I tried to join a breakout room to be like, what's happening in there? And then it kicked me out of that breakout room, took away my host status, and then just put me alone in the middle room, alone by myself in the main room. And so, and then I had to message you. That's why you saw, if you're in the Google Doc, you see me writing, hello, everybody, I'm alone. So I'm sorry about that, but hope that worked out okay and that the discussion was good. Does anybody have, let's try out this, let's try more Zoom features today. And does anybody want to raise their hand with any comments or questions from their session? We'll just do kind of one comment. The raise hand button is I believe at the bottom. Do you all see it? It might be there. Jess sees it. As in, Jess, are you raising your hand or are you emojiing? Who knows? It's under reactions, thumbs up. That's the reactions thing, but isn't there?
Yeah, I can't find a raise hands, and they may have taken it away in the most recent update. I don't know.
Okay,
but
cool.
you can clap or thumbs up in reactions.
Okay.
Yeah. If you go to participants at the bottom, you can say raise hand, yes, no.
Beautiful. Okay, nice. Oh, sweet. So someone did that. Jess raised her hand. Okay, Jess, do you want to say anything from your session? Any questions or comments or thoughts on paradigms?
I mean, sure. Now that I have one, we came up with a couple of possible shifts. About one, the shift in norm around gay rights, and also the fall of the Berlin Wall, and then shifts. We were talking about the shifts relating to theism and atheism throughout our lifetimes. But mostly, I think we got to a it's actually really hard to point at when the paradigm shifts occur and whether they're happening at any given point.
Yeah, I agree with that. And the one thing I'd add to that, and especially one thing we think about strategically here, is the gay rights one brings up, there's a bunch of different things that have changed in our lifetimes, whether it's gay rights or like medical marijuana or things like that. And when you look at the curves or how much of those changes come as a result of new people being born and old people dying, or as a result of mindset changes, it actually looks like most of the changes are a result of like the generational thing of old people dying and new people being born, which is kind of sad because it makes it untractable, the problem also, where you just kind of need to wait for people to die and for new people to be born. But that's just a note on a lot of these paradigm changes, that they mostly happen just through generational time.
It's also unclear whether something like gay rights is a paradigm change, because whether or not gay people should be allowed to be married is still a question that existed within the previous paradigm. It's like if we'd had a whole new paradigm of what marriage was, then maybe that would be a paradigm shift.
I agree. Yeah. I agree. And I think that the takeaway for everybody here is just that when we think about what we're chatting about today, and as we switch into post-capitalism or gay B or whatever you want to call this thing that's up next for society, it is happening. What we're going to talk about today is mostly at that, at that meta kind of abstracted level. So with that, let's go back to sharing the screen, chat about some specifics today. So let me go back over here, click the button. Beautiful. And so, yeah, so now chatting about each of these four kind of sub buckets of networkism, coherent pluralism, bentoism, and generosity. I know that there's a lot of terms in there, but I want to give a brief overview of them before we dive into each. So networkism is just the idea that we're moving from a lot of these centralized trusted institutions like banks and nation states and companies and things like that, and we're moving towards these distributed networked bottom-up institutions. And this is mainly as a result of there being 4 billion networked smartphones out there where you can give and receive information at zero marginal cost. So we're seeing all these new networks. The second one is coherent pluralism, and the idea here is, instead of being now, it's kind of a reaction to networkism. So when we live in a sense-making environment, an information environment of lots of networks, instead of just consuming radio or TV, you have to consume a lot of pluralistic different sources, and then try to create coherence among them. So it's kind of like a responsible individual's reaction to networkism. The third one is called bentoism, and bentoism, the idea here is that you have it's this little 2x2, and it has, the idea is that we're moving from this bottom left corner, now me, where you can kind of zoom out from our now me, focusing just on me perspective, and zoom out from me to think about future me, to think about, now us, and to think about future us and climate change and things like that. So it's kind of thinking about our needs in society. And then the fourth one is generosity, and the generosity or abundance. And the idea here is that it's kind of this shift where we recognize from a now me perspective that some of us have enough, and that we can then give to future us, and we can give to others in the system. So those are kind of the four key pieces of this new mindset. And I want to talk about how each of them is embodied in our response to COVID. So with that, let's chat about networkism first. And so as a reminder, this is what networkism is, and you can see it in these funny Twitter comments, these new networked institutions where top left, it's like, hey, a $10 Uber ride is a lot cheaper than $3,000 for an ambulance. that was after a result of people, calling Ubers instead of to be taken to the emergency room instead of ambulances. Or this bottom left one, it's like, hey, how long until GoFundMe is our nation's leading healthcare provider? That's kind of funny, but it's also kind of sad, but it's also just true, where it's like, it's a good way for us in society to like help, quote unquote, help each other out by using this networked funding mechanism for folks with healthcare. And then this final one, it says, what if public infrastructure was funded by the crowd? Wow, what a crazy idea. That's like this new networked idea where you crowdfund many things, and putting that against, or as some would call it, taxes. Like that's like the traditional centralized way to fund public infrastructure. So these all kind of show this move towards networkism. And I want to talk about how our response to COVID embodies that. So I'm going to talk about 3 different things here. 1 is from an information perspective, 2 is from a money perspective, and 3 is from like an institutional perspective. So from an information perspective, the centralized version of things here is like main media or mainstream media, while the non-centralized version is networked influencers. And I want to show, let's make this big again. So on the centralized side, we saw, it was kind of interesting to see what happened here. There's this recent piece from Recode that says, what went wrong with the media's coronavirus coverage and can we do better? It's kind of just like in 2016 when a bunch of folks were being like, whoa, wow, Trump got elected, we're so surprised. And there were a lot of like post-mortems after that. And as you can see here, there's this image at the bottom is just a bunch of like mainstream media sites talking about coronavirus in January, February, March, and just like dismissing it essentially. And the issue in this article, the main thing I want to highlight here is that when journalists and media sourced things, they sourced stuff from credentialed experts and institutions, which traditionally had been good. But actually, if you're asking the CDC if you should wear masks X amount of time ago, and they would still just say no, no, no. And so that was one of the issues with kind of like the centralized sense making. Versus on the other side here, you have this new decentralized sense making. And the idea here, this graph is from Stratechery, and the idea is now that the marginal cost is 0 to copy and distribute information all around the world, we just have a lot more information. A lot of that information is in the middle ground here, with just like average information. Some of that information is obviously bad, it's misinformation, but some of that information is super valuable. And so what happened is Twitter and other universes, what they did is they were able to source the information and the valuable information more quickly, kind of from first principles, through this kind of decentralized network on Twitter. So you can kind of see those 2 responses in sense making to something like the coronavirus here. So that's on the information side. On the money side, I want to chat about this more with generosity later and money there, but an easy way to look at this is kind of top-down stimulus versus bottom-up network grants. So the top-down stimulus, this is some pseudocode I wrote for the US stimulus package, which was $2 trillion. And essentially it's a very top-down, seeing like a state perspective, where it's just like, hey, for every person, give them $1,200 or, create $1,200 out of thin air, and give them, if they are not employed, give them an extra $600. If you're a small, medium business that pays your staff, you can have $10 million. For every state, give them $340 billion. Give them $340 billion. Proportional to their population, or divided among the populations proportionally. If you're a hospital, here's $100 billion. Airlines have $58 billion, and then put $450 billion in the federal account that you can loan out at 10x to anybody else. So that's kind of like the seeing like a state top-down money perspective, and that's different than this bottom-up perspective, which is like, okay, this thing called fast grants, which was fast funding for science, and they just got together really quick. They said, hey, here's 10 million bucks. We'll get to you in 48 hours if you get it or don't get it. You get the money. And so just it was kind of just like a bottom-up quick way to fund science that we need. So that's one way to look at this. The final way is from an institutional perspective. And what I mean here is when you think about institutions, they are things that coordinate and motivate people. And the coordination usually comes from information, and the motivation usually comes from money. So those 2 things combined kind of make an institution. I want to show like some companies that are centralized, and then some networked or new networked orgs as some decentralized examples. So On the centralized side, you have something like 3M, which makes masks, and it's pretty sweet. They're making, they doubled their mask production in the last 3 to 6 months, and now they're moving up to 25 million masks per week, which is a lot. And they're obviously a very old company. And that's versus this kind of decentralized response, which is this thing called open source COVID medical supplies, which is just a random Facebook group. It has 70,000 people in it, and they're making 1 million masks per week, which is only 4% of what 3M is making. But it was they're actually increasing at 2x, 2.5x per week, and they were founded just recently. And obviously, I guess what I want to highlight here is that they were also founded. Facebook as a thing barely existed 10 years ago. 3D printing as a thing barely existed 10 years ago. And so when you think about these are two different responses, institutional responses here. And I think that obviously it's not the case that open source COVID medical supplies it's difficult to compare them. And obviously the one on the right is like worse, quote unquote, but it's just new. It's just it's like a proto example of what we're starting to see here. Another one is this Masks for All movement. So I asked folks on Twitter, hey, did Masks for All actually have an impact on the CDC's announcement? And I was like, almost certainly CDC made a decision without thinking about the hashtag or the movement. But one of the main leaders of Masks for All actually replied and said, yes, it did. I have firsthand knowledge. So he was like, actually, Masks for All was a pretty, weirdly, the hashtag itself was helpful in changing the CDC's decisions. Like, that's weird, right? He says, by hashtag, he means, many hours of pitching and briefing politicians and their teams and other similar legwork. So it's obviously not just like CDC saw a hashtag and was like, sweet, let's make Masks for All. But the Masks for All movement was definitely a big part of that shift. So that's another example. There are other really interesting things like hashtag #GetUsPPE, GetUsPPE.org, which combined it was a clearinghouse for a bunch of these PPE marketplaces. This thing, Coronavirus Tech Handbook, was an amazing handbook that was coming up at the very beginning that just had edit permissions on for everybody and anybody could add to it. So these are, again, these bottom-up responses to this versus the top-down. So with that, you could see these as all from an information perspective, from a money perspective, and from an institutional perspective. There's the kind of traditional centralized response, and then there's the bottom-up networked response. And with that, yeah, the networkism more generally is just this trend in these new decentralized institutions outcompeting, not on everything, but outcompeting on a variety of facets, some of these old and centralized institutions. So with that, we are going to go into our sessions, into our breakout rooms. And I will make sure not to mess it up this time by trying to go into one. So again, let's take 2 or 3 minutes here and discuss again, what do you think about this? Just check for understanding or critique. And then this interesting question here is, if we've seen a bunch of these hashtags show up, hashtag #GetUsPPE, hashtag Masks for All, hashtag Flatten the Curve, what hashtags would you expect to gain traction in the next 12 months of COVID? That's like one way to view this. So with that, hello, everybody, and welcome back. I hope you chatted about networkism. We're just going to zoom right into coherent pluralism now. And so let me go back to sharing my screen. Oh, there's my timer. Beautiful timing. So the next one is coherent pluralism. And the idea behind coherent pluralism is that it's kind of the correct response to a networked environment, to a networked sense-making environment. So here's John Lennon with some glasses. That's the idea. You're kind of putting on a bunch of these different glasses in order to create a plural perspective, but still a coherent one. I just want to share this picture on the right is from this piece that I'm writing right now, and I am having someone illustrate it, and that is how she represented coherent pluralism, which is cool. So the idea here is that you could think of this from a kind of over the last couple hundred years perspective, where you had this modernism thing, which is like, hey, here's the truth. Nationalism and patriotism, like broadcasting the truth, top down, broadcasting through the TV, through radio, that perspective. It's one lens. Then you have like this postmodernism perspective, or this fake news perspective, which is, oh, maybe I have my red feed, maybe I have my blue feed. You know what? I don't really know what is true. I'm just going to be super pluralistic, and there is no truth. There is no fake news. What is even real? And that's not right either. And so what you want is this kind of meta-modernist perspective, or that's just another name for coherent pluralism, which is to have multiple different glasses you're putting on to view things in a pluralistic way, but then create coherence among them. So again, it's how responsible individuals do sense making given networkism. And again, here's like kind of a way to think about it is like, if you think about that first thing on the left, you have, let me bring up this pointer again. On the left here, you have, if you're just consuming from one source and maybe you're consuming from one of these sources, then you might have thought something about COVID that was just wrong or whatever. But you also can't do this middle perspective here, which is just like, oh, here's all this information, but not put these misinformation and valuable information things there. Just be like, there's so much information, whatever, there's no truth anymore, everything's fake news. And but the third perspective is what you want to have, which is create this plural perspective where you look at as many things as you can and then create an answer from that. So I want to kind of show it in two big ways here with searching for truth while existing in uncertainty, but then also through empathy. So the searching through for truth, existing in uncertainty, that's kind of the vibe of coherent pluralism. It's like this constant, relentless search for the truth while still things are pretty uncertain. So the example here is from 538, and I'm just going to read this because it really gets at, this is from a recent post that they had about masks, and just really gets at what it means to be a coherently plural individual. So Maggie writes, ultimately, the expert advice on masks is to get comfortable with not knowing the right answer. You can and should have some trusted advisors. You can and should read up on why certain things are or are not being recommended. But there are a lot of issues around this virus in which two experts can read the same data and come to different conclusions. For the rest of us, that just means accepting that sometimes we'll just have to do the best we can without a clear set of instructions. That's the situation. You're being coherently plural. You're having trusted advisors and sources, and then you're just doing the best you can. That's what coherent pluralism is like. The other version of coherent pluralism is instead of just pluralistically looking at like facts, there's also like a pluralistic viewpoint with like empathy with other humans. And so this was this great video that Italy put out 10 days before, when they were in an intense situation, but before the US was. And so they made this beautiful video where they just went around and they said, where it was just individuals on their phones kind of stitched together saying these nice messages where it's like, hey, Danielle from 10 days ago, hey, a huge mess is about to happen. We were at 2,000, now we're at 18,000. I used to make fun of people wearing face masks, but now we're like a whole nation stuck at home. But there's still good stuff, like yesterday when we got out on our balconies. But really, stay at home. Like, don't, this is serious stuff. I thought this was a great example of, again, in an environment where you can, where everybody has smartphones, 4 billion network smartphones, you can make information like this directly from people's phones, and we can really empathize with these folks. And for me, this is one of the most powerful pieces of this thing, was seeing this initially and being like, wow, that's what's going to happen to the US and other places around the world. That's really powerful. So that's what coherent pluralism is. So again, within your groups, let's chat with some folks. And I think that again, feel free to check with each other on questions and critique. And then the question here is, how coherently plural is your sense making right now? Could it be more coherent, aka are you just kind of like existing in seas of information without any coherence? But could it also be more plural? So maybe you don't have enough sources, or you're not looking from as many perspectives as you should. So with that, let's do this thing. Open up these breakout rooms. Boom, recreate. Boom. Okay, enjoy your room. See you in 2 minutes. Actually, we're gonna keep zooming. We gotta we have 9 more minutes left, so we're gonna keep zooming and literally actually zooming. So we're going into the next one here, which is bentoism. So bentoism is a cool concept, and just as a note here, so it was made by it's from my friend Yancey Strickler's book, This Could Be Our Future. And just for full disclosure, I am like working with Yancey on this, so I like this more than maybe I should, but I think it's good. And the idea is that you have, I like to think of it from a needs perspective, where you have in the bottom left corner here, you have your now me, your basic needs. You're like, what do I actually need right now? And then you have your future me perspective, which is stuff like meaning. So it's like meaning and mastering and self-actualization. It's kind of your old self looking back. Then you also have now us, your now us needs, like connection and thinking about others. And you also have these future us needs of resilience and climate change and things like that. So it's just a nice little 2x2. And it's just a helpful way to view the world. And you can kind of think of it as, not dissimilar from Maslow's hierarchy, but I like it for a variety of more reasons. But yeah, the safety and physiological ones are kind of like now me basic needs. The love and belonging is kind of like connection. Self-actualization is kind of like meaning. And then Maslow doesn't really have this future us piece. So let's talk about how our response to COVID embodies bentoism. So we'll talk about the bento itself and just like how it provides us a nice view on what's happening, a way to view the world, but also that this that COVID shows us that we can actually do a little bit of reflection on our needs, that we can go into what some folks are calling like wartime production mode. So first, from a bento perspective itself, from a now me perspective, you can see it's happening. I mean, everybody did their now me thing initially of like, okay, got to go to the grocery store, get toilet paper, whatever. But also some really sad now me things where it's like people expect, because of supply chain issues and these things like that, about 800 million people are hungry today, but they're expecting it to go up to double to 1.6 billion people to be hungry as a result of this. So that's the now me perspective, the basic needs. And then the future me, I think a lot of folks have really felt this too, where they're like, like meaning in life. This has really changed like their directions and things like that for where they want to go, and kind of like their laws of adjacent possible, like what is possible for their future. The now us, this has really shown us how interconnected we are. And this is just a graph of all the places the virus went at the beginning. And then from a future us perspective, obviously stuff like, flattening the curve has really made us be like, okay, I need to stay inside now so that, in a month or two, things aren't overloaded within my city. So that's that perspective. But I think the more important thing here is actually just like how the virus gives us a blank slate and shows us that we can actually change how we think about ourselves and humanity's needs. So, generally speaking, we have existed on the left side here of, more focused on now me. And what this is kind of doing is, giving us this more holistic perspective towards the more general bento box. So you can see this in consumer spending. This is a graph from the New York Times about just how, spending going up and down for various things, mostly down for a variety of things, where people are responding to the event. So they're kind of changing their needs. The other example, obviously, is something here like the total amount of tests we've had for COVID. This is in the US. It's gone, now we've made 3 million total tests. And this is like the wartime production side, or the plowshares to swords side, where you've taken these things that have normally done a certain kind of thing for society, and you said, hey, let's actually change them to do this other good thing for society. So I like to think of this as so this is a graph of the stock market, and obviously, and it has gone down and is going to come back up, and so it's going to look like a check mark on what timeline we don't know. But I think thinking about as a check mark is not entirely correct. I think you have to think about, instead of just the x and the y axis here, you could also think about the z axis, and the z axis is really what we're talking about. Where the z axis, the question is, how much is that z axis going to be focused again on stuff like, our old way of doing things, this now me focused way of doing things, versus shifting towards more of kind of a future us way of doing things. And whether or not you agree with it or don't agree with it, the like Green New Deal, green stimulus is trying to get at this idea. It's saying, hey, as we rebuild and as we, try to do things differently going forwards, how can we make it be, more focused on future us? As a funny example of this, like, my friend John on Facebook was saying, hey, wow, look at that rise in COVID-19 cases. And he's like, oh, wait, that's just global CO2. Never mind, no need to do anything. I thought this was funny and sad, where it's just like, obviously for a lot of us, we've seen this with COVID and we've been like, oh God, and now we're doing all these intense measures. And obviously we have not yet done that in society yet with stuff like climate change. We don't have those, that feedback loop tightly coupled enough yet. So yeah, that's the hope, is that we move towards a box on the right more. So again, bentoism is it's a nice, just a lens of viewing the world, and it really helps us understand humanity's needs, and that we can actually change them. And this crisis has showed us that we can, that during the crisis itself, we can change our needs, and we can go into wartime production mode. And hopefully what it'll show us is that we can kind of move towards more of these future us facing perspectives as we kind of come out of the crisis. So with that, we're going to go into some groups. And I think that what I want you to do is, answer the question, how does your own bento box respond to the question, what should I do in these COVID-y times? So you can ask your own little bento box. You say, well, my future me self says this, but my, future us self says this, or whatever. That's kind of, so you can kind of walk through those different pieces. So with that, let's put you all into groups. Wow.
It's really grounded it to start naming the arenas and where are the breakdowns, and what are the adjacent possibles?
Yeah.
That opens up.
Yeah, I like that.
That was the me, us, or the now, actually it was future us that we were into.
Yeah, that makes sense. Everybody, we were just chatting with Nancy for a hot sec about how they're talking about, Nancy was saying, how can we just break down to break through and to think about those laws of adjacent possible. So we're going to go into our final little bit here, and then we're going to have a little bit of time at the end to either you can leave when you want to leave, or we can chat about stuff for as long as you want. I think there's a party afterwards, so we can't chat for infinity time, but we can chat for a bit. So. The final piece here is generosity. And so generosity or abundance, and the idea here is that for some of us, and I'm not, I know that a lot of folks, for some folks in the developed world, we have now me overflow, which means that we kind of have enough. Like for me right now, I'm in this nice room. I have enough food downstairs. I have friends. I have all these great things in my life. And so my now me is my basic needs are definitely filled up. My connection now us needs are almost certainly filled up. I get a lot of meaning out of my work. And so I can really focus on giving my overflow and just like giving back money or whatever to now us and to future us to help other folks experience this as well. So that's the idea here. And you can think of this from a couple different perspectives. One, there's this beautiful graph over the last 2 centuries. This top left one, especially, look at that one. It's extreme poverty. 200 years ago, almost everybody was in extreme poverty, 94% of people. And now it's less than 10%. Again, that's still 750 million people, which is crazy, but it's so much better than it used to be. So we're getting closer and closer to that. Or like child mortality, used to be half of kids used to die before the age of 5. Now it's less than 5% again. Like that's an amazing, amazing thing. So we can kind of see it from this macro perspective, but also from the micro perspective. So this is a graph of individual income on the log scale versus how happy you get. And of course, at the very beginning, like if you're one of those people who live on less than $2 a day, the first $1,000 you get is super, super, super impactful. It makes you a lot happier. But then as you keep on doing these doublings, it gets you up a bit. But then once you get to $45,000 per year, it essentially doesn't make you happier. You essentially level out at that point. And so that's a very powerful perspective, is why someone like me, why I just self-tax myself 10%, because I'm like, look, I got enough. The money's not making me happier. It actually makes me happier to give it back to other people, which is crazy. And so another key example of this from a macro perspective is just something like universal basic income. If you think 200 years ago, would it have been impossible to give everybody a basic income when kids were still dying, when half kids were still dying before the age of 5? No, that would have been much more difficult. But now it's actually a possibility because we're having this abundance of capital where we actually can give back to the system. So I want to show it. So that's the idea behind it, but it shows up in 3 big ways with our response. 1 is these hashtags, 2 are like these mutual aid funds, and 3 is these billionaire philanthropy things. So these hashtags, the idea here is just to let the money flow through you. So there's this one, hashtag pass the check from Give Directly, and this other one, split the check. Again, it was a hashtag. I don't know why the hashtag isn't here. And thus far, the idea is that when you get your check from the government, your $1,200, you just give it to someone else. You pledge to let it pass through you and pass it on to someone else. And roughly right now for Give Directly, about 1,000 people have pledged to pass on the check for a total of $1 million. That's not very much in the big scheme of things. But again, similar to the things we were chatting about earlier with the masks and 3M stuff, we didn't even see this very much during 2008, in 2008 financial crisis. And hashtags were just invented in 2007 at that time. So it's like, again, these are proto examples of like the government, doing helicopter money, feeding us with money, and then people recognizing, look, I can just let it flow through me back to the system. So that's one example. Another is adding money to these shared pools. So the idea here is that you just kind of have, if you have bonus money, you can just kind of put it in the shared pool and let people take from it. So these are all, there's this huge explosion of mutual aid documents that showed up as COVID started. And these are just some notes from people that say, hey, I can Venmo 4 different parties $50 each for supplies. PM me. Or someone says, hey, I can Venmo you $40. This other person says, hey, I can Venmo you $50 to get groceries. These are just and these are obviously just 4 examples. There's so many people just being like, look, I got bonus money. Who needs it? And so just putting it into the shared pool and then trusting and allowing anybody else to take that money from the pool. This has obviously also happened with things like GoFundMe, which is kind of a institutionalized or codified version of this, where you have these big pools of people, raising for America's Food Fund. This is, $14 million across, 10,000 plus donors, or this like Frontline Responders Fund, which is, $7 million across almost 20,000 donors of people being like, look, I got enough. I can help out and I can give back to the system. I want to make one final note on this, which is kind of a weird one, which is that I'm all into the self-taxing thing and giving back in a weird variety of ways. And so I was on Craigslist a year or two ago. I just put up on there. I said, "Hey, I have free $120 cash. Anybody want this?" And when I did that at the time, and when I was like talking about it with friends, and I put it on the internet, like people thought it was just weird. They thought it was like really weird. And it obviously is kind of weird. But also now that this COVID thing has happened, all these Venmo things are the exact same example of this. It's people just offering up, just saying, "Look, I have this money. Does anybody want it?" And so now it just seems a little bit more normalized there, which is kind of cool. So that's the second big piece, is adding money to shared pools. And the third big piece is billionaire philanthropy. This gets into the weirdness of like abundance versus generosity. Like, how generous am I personally really being if I'm a rich white man, straight man who lives in America, who, went to college, has a computer science degree, and clearly have abundance? It's like, am I really being generous, or is it just like me giving what I didn't really earn or whatever back to the system? In any case, you can see some examples of this. I think the best one is someone like Jack Dorsey, really giving. I mean, 28% of his wealth is a lot of his wealth into this fund, and then he just puts it in. It's also funny, again, back to the like bottom upness. He just has a Google spreadsheet where he says, "Here's how much money I'm giving to different things." So that's the final piece of this abundance thing. So that's the idea here. We're actually not going to go into these breakout rooms, but I just want to go into conclusion mode to say, again, so what we're mostly talking about here is this paradigm change, which we're not just like tweaking some little parameters. We're not even changing goals. We're trying to change these macro ideas of how institutions are formed and what money means and whether people have enough of it and whether you need to, hoard it all for yourself or whatever. We're trying to change stuff at the paradigm level that will then trickle down into laws and markets and code and all those kinds of things. And here are these 4 big key ideas that do it. And I want to actually make one final note here, which is, and actually Peter and I were chatting about this, but when we were discussing what I should talk about, and it was like 4 ideas is kind of too many. Like it's a lot of ideas, but they actually are interlocking in an interesting way, in that like networkism is this move towards decentralized networks. Coherent pluralism is like the response to that. Like you have to be coherently plural given a decentralized sense-making environment. Or something like bentoism is an example of coherent pluralism. It's pluralistic in that it's this 2x2, but it's also very coherent and clear what it is. And of course, generosity can be expressed as now me overflow. And so they're kind of expressed in each other's. And obviously with generosity, we saw lots of different like networked generosity, where it's not like people are, the fact that people could just put on a random Google Doc spreadsheet, "Hey, anybody can have this Venmo money." That's an example of this networked bottom-up generosity. So all these are being kind of embodied in both existing institutions, but also these new bottom-up networked institutions. So that's the macro idea here. And I guess what I would say is, let me actually share, someone asked for this, so let me put it in the chat. I'll share this, remind me later. I don't care about that. This is let me share this now, actually put it in the chat. This is the spreadsheet, or this is the Google Doc from today. So you can check that out if you want to. Let's admit Bert. And then the other note is, if you want to learn more about this stuff, you can go to just like rhyslindmark.com, and I curate a lot of these movements in my newsletter, so that's a good place to check it out. You can also go to the bentoism. Bentoism has a Substack and a newsletter, so that one is specific to bentoism and has a lot of great ideas for how to incorporate bentoism, like a weekly bento, into your daily life. Feel free to just hit me up if you have any ideas or discussion or comments or critique, or if you want to help out. We have some interesting new research positions, especially around trying to see how these things are manifest within COVID, and how we can kind of find a path going forwards to make sure that the society looks something kind of like this new paradigm, instead of something that's rejecting that. So with that, thank you all again for coming. I think let's take 6 minutes for any final questions or anything like that. And then I'll let Peter, talk about what's next, that kind of thing. So does anybody, feel free to, let's use the raise a hand thing again. Does anybody, if you click on your managed person, oh, boom, nice work, Keith. You got first. So Keith, you could, I could speak.
Yeah, so I think the main thing when I read your newsletter recently and invited a whole bunch of people to this call was how impressed I was at the way that you were making sense of things, and also the kind of rapidity of your sense-making response. And I've been writing my own paper on how this can be, like this moment can be an inflection point for handling existential risk issues. But I was wondering if you could speak to how you are engaging with making sense of things, like kind of what your own stack is there. And then also how that might relate to collective intelligence, how you're organizing when feeding off other people's ideas and how you kind of maintain those connections.
Yeah, good question. So, and thank you for, and it's also funny because the rapidity or the circular nature of it is kind of annoying, but kind of true. And I think it's a crucial part of it. So I think that the way, and let me say one thing also, I guess, if you noted existential risks, I just want to put a quick plug for, if you go to my website and go to my About Me, there's like a 100-page book on meta existential risks. So if you want to look at that, if you're into how exponential curves are happening within AI, nuclear security, biosecurity, and climate change, and how to like meta solve them, that's the idea. But hopefully the meta solve is what we're talking about today. On your note of how I do my own sense making, so I think that it's weird. I mean, so for me personally, there's these crucial networks of Facebook and Twitter. And those are things where you have to just, it's that coherently plural perspective. You're like, okay, who exists, keeping your Twitter feed, really thinking about who you're following and making sure you're following people who you think are providing interesting, good information, but also noticing your own beacon. So it takes a lot of self-understanding here. Various folks on this call may be lawyers or developers or whatever. And so it's like knowing who you are, and then knowing that, searching for other similar people who are like that, and then putting out your beacon out there and being like, look, I'm a person who's like this. And then when you say that, then other people are like, oh, me too, cool. And then you start to just like kind of combine around like a snowball kind of. So that's one thing I'd say is within Twitter and Facebook, make sure you're following and the right people and trying to know yourself and engage with those people who are similar-ish to you. Then I would say that there's also the Substack, various newsletters. So there's a bunch of random newsletters that I follow, and maybe I'll post it on my website sometime later. But they're just like crucial. They're just like there are a bunch of random different newsletters about shareholder capitalism and future tech VC stuff. So not a clear answer there, but newsletters is the other crucial piece. And then the collective intelligence piece is actually weird because I think there's how one connects with others in this ecosystem. If I was operating in an old school environment in a game A world, then I would like create a nonprofit and just like start rocking and rolling there. Versus in this new world, it's like, should I create a hashtag or something like that? Like, how should I operate in that form? How much should I raise? Should I try to make money? So those are like weirder questions, which I think are harder to answer. But when I do that, I try to just be in alignment with that 2x2. So I try to do things in a network first mode. I try to do things in a bentoist way. I try to do things in a coherently plural way. And I try to do things in a now me overflow abundance kind of way. So that's my initial response. Thank you for the question. Hope that was helpful. The other person who raised their hand, which I can look at here, who else raised their hand? Oh, boom, Jess. Okay, Jess, you can ask the question.
So the question I had was something around okay. If you imagine it's 2 or 3 years from now and COVID crisis has been and gone and we're kind of back to like shitty normal, why would that, like, what would have been the cause of that? Like, if we didn't manage to put in any sort of like bentoist principles, there were no paradigm shifts that happened, we went back to kind of this really uncomfortable capitalism that everybody hates. Like, why would that have happened? Like, yeah,
that's a good question. I think that, well, I think that's most likely to happen. Like, that's, all these things are just proto examples. We're just in the beginning stage here where we're starting to make these balls of people who are into these things. And again, there's 8 billion people on Earth, and we're, even if you think about all those people, and if you think about, and still, so 750 million of them still are making less than $2 a day. It's like they need to focus on their current scarcity stuff, and that's really intense and sad. And I think so. Yeah, this is going to be. We talk about this a lot. Like, it's not a 10-year startup plan. It is a generational shift. So in the next 3 years, I pretty much expect things to go as normal, to go back. But I think that what will happen in a negative sense is, I think that some of the things, like what will have gone wrong, I think that many of the things that will have gone wrong that we're already starting to see are just like the classic tough things where the like nation states are doing things that may not be the best. Like, the government has their $454 billion of money that they put in the Federal Reserve that they're going to lend that they can lend it at a 10-to-1 rate, but they're not being transparent about it right now. And so it's like, oh, are we just going to do some kind of thing where we're just like giving money back to like random rich people who have the amount of money to do a lot? It's like, that could be sad and true. So I think that very well it may happen.
Or maybe one way of asking this is like, what are the opportunities that exist like roughly in this moment?
Good question.
Like, what are the forks in the road that we have right now that like, if, without taking them?
Yeah. So I think, I think that the forks that we have now are, I think a big fork is something like, what does now that we've created, Ray Dalio, the Bridgewater billionaire, is talking about, okay, we've just made a bunch of money. How are we going to repay that debt? And I think that the way that we think about who repays that debt and how, and making sure that as we start to repay that debt, we make things, and again, I'm not like fully bullish on Green New Deal stuff, but making it more Green New Deal adjacent, like that we're, moving things more towards this climate changey future us, inequality or equality-based perspective, I think would be really powerful. So one fork is how much and again, this is something that's hard for all of us individually here on the call to change, but it's like from a nation state perspective, how do those laws get implemented? I think the other forks, just for us to know individually, are like, maybe the forks are just things like being with each other in groups, and these new weird sense-making groups, and just, and I think that maybe this is a perfect example of this, is something like the Stoa, where it's like Peter had a fork in the road for himself. He knew that he could be like a glue sense-maker type, and could steward a space like this, and he decided to do it. And it's not like these 20 people on the call, we're not gonna like change the world or whatever, we're still just part of this massive movement. But I think that there's a sense in which seeing this time as an opportunity to connect with and experiment with these new forms of being with the other aligned people, I think that's the primary fork in the road that I see for us now. For us to be like, yeah, I am going to hop on that weird call with those weird people, or, oh, I'm going to try things in this weird new way. That's, I think, what I would probably say. So let's do one final question, Peter, if that's okay, and then we'll, sure. Okay, and then we can leave. So I wish I was better doing this, but Colin, do you have a question? So go for it.
Yeah, well, just some thoughts out of what you were just saying that sparked up for me is, one, you were talking about the possible troubles over the next few years coming out of this. And I mean, one of my big fears that I've been thinking about is kind of the shifts in biopolitics and biopolitical regimes out of this, much the way that like security changed after 9/11. How are we going to think of health and wellness, and also flows of people, goods, etc.? How are institutions going to control how we live differently now because of this? So that's a big question for me. And then out of this, what you were just saying about new ways of connecting, etc., thinking about the decentering of normal, and what ways can we utilize build these features that we want, and also how do we go about questioning what do we want collectively?
Could you say that last piece a little bit more? You were talking about decentering of normal, and you're thinking about how do we come? Say more on that piece, and how do we come to the conclusion of what we want?
Maybe not a single conclusion, but thinking about plurality rather than in the information sense, but in the political sense. How do we find new goals? You're talking about these paradigms. As we'll move towards that, instead of, oh, we're going back to normal, how are we thinking about how do we build new goals that create new networks, etc.? So just any more thoughts on that is interesting. And of course, the infrastructures that loops back into.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, Nancy, did you want to respond? Yeah.
Just a quick response that we've been given the opportunity to see more clearly the needs and the different ways of meeting the needs. And in addition to distilling from that abstractions and models and structures for sense making, is to greatly enrich the stories, the proofs of concept of different ways of doing things that are emerging all over the world in response to the breakdowns and the opportunities and then reverse engineer, because part of how we discover what we really want is to see something that we never thought of. I think of what's going on in Taiwan's version of democracy right now. Like, who knew? Just who knew? But what do you see? It's, oh my God, yeah, that like makes sense. And there's those sorts of examples at all levels of society and all sectors and branches of the needs, these discoveries of how we actually can meet our needs by healing and not harming the planet or the people. And then reflecting on sharing those stories not only raises our hope and our energy and our sense of possibility, but it actually grounds it with a sense of direction. Because then you can say, how did they do it? And then that starts illustrating or manifesting. And the abstractions, you know, we're using the abstract models as our sense-making structures, but then that populates that in a living way.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that there's the way that I think about that is the usual way that things, when you're trying to scale something, you can scale it like Instagram scaled, where they had 10 employees and it still had 30 million users, where they scaled through code, through, you know, or you can scale things through like proto examples where you're like, hey, look at how these people are doing this thing. And then the scale is just spreading that idea to other folks. And it's not like the original people that got the idea are like making money from like everybody else doing it or whatever. It's just like, this was a good thing. Let's like scale that around the world. And so I think that's a really good perspective that I agree with. The other thing I'd say to your question, Colin, is I think a lot of what you're getting at, these new goals, we talk about it a lot as like, when you think about it from like a Kuhnian structure of scientific revolutions perspective, these new paradigms, and when you make a new paradigm, there's like the new paradigm piece, which is one kind of science, like, whoa, there's like new relativity stuff. But then there's like the normal science within that new paradigm, which is like how you just creating that incremental stuff. So I think that a lot of what we need to do now is like, for folks like us who are like, oh man, like super pluralistic, you know, meta modernist, whatever. It's like, that's cool. But how do we actually do the normal science? How do we just like make stuff actually happen? And so I think that in like get down to the metrics piece essentially. And that kind of gets also to this idea of like, so that's one thing I want to say. The other thing that I just agree with you on is I think that there's, you know, the supply chains and the weird, like the fact that this is both a super connecting thing, but also a very isolating thing, and how it shows our like lack of resilience or whatever, or just in time supply chain stuff. And then obviously the security and surveillance stuff. I think that will be those are some of the trade-offs that we're dealing with right now. It's like, okay, the trade-off of public health is probably good enough for surveilling us to some extent, and again, depending, the new Bluetooth, Google, Apple surveillance things are less surveilly than normal, but so I think that trade-off is definitely at hand, and we're seeing that as one of the bifurcations for sure. Is like the disaster capitalism versus, or like taking advantage of the crisis from a nation state perspective.
Or what they're doing in Taiwan, where they've turned the trade-off between security and our safety into an integrated synergy, where their democracy is actually being enhanced by how they're using AI instead of the other way around.
Yeah, I like that.
Rhys,
So
I'm gonna jump
exactly.
in.
Exactly.
And then there's an unimproved Zoom call link, which I'm glad that exists. So feel free to jump on that. So copy and paste that if you're interested while we close. Yeah, that was awesome, Rhys. That sparked a lot of thoughts. Before I make some closing announcements, do you have any closing thoughts for us?
I just want to thank everybody again for their time and their energy and their enthusiasm today, especially with that first thing where there was an issue. That was sad, but hopefully it worked out okay. And hopefully you all did some good learning stuff. If you have any other thoughts, definitely email me or put them in that Google Doc. Thank you for doing that as well. Or if you want to help out, feel free to do that. And again, Peter, thank you for providing this space.
Yeah, so I'll make some closing upcoming announcements on upcoming events. But first, Rhys, thank you so much again for coming out. I'd love to have you back. And I was thinking maybe circling, I'll CC you and Nancy on an email thread, because there's a wisdom gym emerging out of this Stoic space. It'd be cool to have like a Bentoism or something akin to that, like as a weekly basis. So I'll check in with you guys about that. So upcoming events, you can check out the website, the stoa.ca. One I'll plug right now. It's a Trauma Drama with Pat Ryan. It's a little bit on the dark side, but it's I'll just leave it at that. And if that intrigues you, the darkness, then RSVP to it. Coming up next in 30 minutes is an existential dance party. You can watch a video right here. You can RSVP here. And the theme is Love Struck. So if you have any Love Struck vibes, romantic vibes that you want to dance off, feel free to come to that. It's going to be the same link. I'm going to close it down. We'll reopen up in a couple of minutes. That being said, yeah, this is the post-capitalistic experiment of the Stoa. It's based off a gift economy. I'm viewing the Stoa as a gift to the world right now in the time of need. If anyone's inspired, like, to provide a gift to the Stoa or me as a steward of the Stoa, it has to be, you know, something that kind of just bubbles up. It just feels right, that delicious rightness. Just go to that link for more information. That being said, thanks everyone for coming out today.
Thank you.